It's the illustrious Jonnie Stewart. When I'm not eating my liver pate and reading the Wall Street Journal, do you know what I listen to? I listen to Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty because he is the #1 wrestling podcast in the country.
This is Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty. Greetings, wrestling fans, and welcome to Wrestling Nostalgia. I am your host, Dave Dynasty. We have a great episode for you today. We have the illustrious Jonnie Stewart on. This is a spectacular interview. I cannot wait for you to hear it. Jonnie tells all kinds of stories, so entertaining, such a great talker. We're going to have Jonnie on again in the future because, man, like I said, we only hit the tip of the iceberg here with him, and he's got so many more stories to tell. So I can't wait for you to hear that. I don't have a lot to talk about. There's not a lot of current wrestling or anything I really want to speak of. The only thing I really want to talk about is this is kind of our 7th anniversary episode for Wrestling Nostalgia. Our very first episode was released on October 3rd, 2016. Of course, at that time, we were called The Dave Dynasty Show. A few years later, we rebranded to Wrestling Nostalgia to kind of be a little more encompassing, a little more telling in our name of what we were doing here. So, yeah, off and on, 7 years. Fairly consistent for the most part. We did have some breaks there, right? Some downtime in there or whatever else. But still, 7 years of doing this podcast, over 200 episodes. I feel like that's a pretty good accomplishment. I'm pretty proud of that. I'm pretty excited about the library of content we have out there, the episodes that are out there available for people. And I'm super excited about the future, right? We have a lot of great stuff, still a lot of great people to talk to, a lot of great stories to tell. So there's still a lot more miles left in the old tank. I still love to talk wrestling. I feel like I'm a little more focused now in my approach. We've revamped, we've rebooted, we're going bi-weekly now. It allows me to really kind of raise the bar a little bit, right? I don't feel like I'm having to scramble to find guests on a weekly basis. I can be a little more selective. I don't mean any offense to anybody. That's not what I mean by that. But it means that being bi-weekly, it gives me a little more prep time, a little more time to book guests. And I feel like it's a positive move for the podcast and for me as a host. So I'm super excited about the future. This is, I'll be 7 years, but this is only the beginning, right? We've got a long, long time left in this. I don't feel like there's any reason that I will be stopped doing this anytime soon. So hang in there. This is a long haul for us. So again, thanks for joining us. Thanks for the 7 years and for being listeners and the continued growth that we've had pretty consistently this whole time. So I appreciate that. Make sure you follow us on social media. We're out there on all those platforms, and subscribe to us wherever you like to listen to podcasts. That's the best way to support us. So let's take a quick break because, man, this is a fun, long, story-filled interview, and I can't wait for it to get to it. So let's take a quick break, and when we come back, again, we will have that interview with the illustrious Jonnie Stewart. So hang in there. If you like horror movies, be sure to check out Dave Dynasty and Ike Isaacs on the Listen to Their Screams Horror Podcast. It is available on all podcast platforms and on social media at Listen to Screams. That is Listen, the number 2, and Screams. Welcome back to Wrestling Nostalgia. I'm now joined by our guest, the illustrious Jonnie Stewart. John, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on your show. I've been wanting to talk about Indiana wrestling, Dick the Bruiser, WWA, because he was the second promotion I worked for like 30 years. And so thank you for giving me this platform. And I'm just delighted to have your viewers and listeners listen to my stories, I guess.
Yeah, we're glad to have you on. I'm a fan of yours, John. I know a lot of people give a lot of crap to that late AWA stuff, late 80s. Man, I'm a fan. I love that old ESPN stuff from the late 80s. Of course, right. That was during prime time when I was watching everything I could. But right. I actually thought it was entertaining. It has its faults. We'll discuss that in a little bit. I'm sure we'll get to that. But let's start. I always like to start by asking people, how did you become a fan of pro wrestling?
I was the kid of the 70s. I grew up in the 70s in Chicago, and my high school and grade school friends, we all laughed with each other that we're all batshit crazy because we saw, what we watched on TV in the 70s, Harry Carey doing the Cubs game drunk, Evil Knievel, Dick the Bruiser wrestling, Bozo Circus, Garfield Goose, which was this guy in this military dictator, jacket, Captain Kangaroo, a lot of dictator uniforms
Yeah.
growing up. And, just there were some bizarre shows and of course, so I became a very visual person. And as a man, males are very visual also. And, I liked wrestling. I liked things that were physical. I was a great football player. So I gravitated towards wrestling and was the only thing on Sunday morning. I know people can't even fathom that, but when I grew up in the 70s, there was 4 channels, a UHF channel and 2, 5, 7, and 9, 5 channels. And so on Sunday morning before church, we'd watch Bruiser Wrestling because it was before Vern put his TV on in Chicago. And my dad was an automobile dealer in Chicago. I think this is one of the funniest "how did you get into wrestling" stories on the planet. And I tell this to as many people as I can. So my dad is an automobile dealer in Chicago, and I'm sure everyone can remember in Chicago, Bruiser's show was sponsored by Ben's Auto Sales.
Yeah.
And so Ben, his name was Bernie Terowitz, just a great guy, retired in Florida, very wealthy. And he gave my father tickets to the International Amphitheater 1979. Now, folks, you got to go back in time with me, use your imagination. It's kind of at the decline of the WWA and Bruiser Wrestling. It's before Vern Gagne took over, full bore the city of promoting the city of Chicago. So Ben's Auto Sales tells my father, go there a little early. There's a hospitality suite where you can go up and meet all the wrestlers. And my mom is this, kind of classy, woman from the far northwest side of Chicago. Her mind starts just going all places thinking there's going to be a cocktail party with the wrestlers. I am not lying to you. I am not. This is the God's honest truth. That there's going to be a cocktail party with the wrestlers in the second level of the International Amphitheater. Can you just see Moose Cholak with like a Manhattan and Spike Huber and Steve Regal, with martinis. I mean, oh my God. So we go there. It's in the summer, and my mother and folks, please let me finish the story. I know it's a little long. My mother and sister are in sailor outfits. White pants with blue sailor tops. My father's got his automobile dealer attire, his Zanzibar pants and his shirt. And then my mom's got me probably dressed as some kind of, rich kid, which I was. I'm just saying, like a dorky Sunday school outfit. And we walk into the amphitheater and it's like the Star Wars bar. And my mom's face was like, holy shit, what have we walked into? And the record player, metaphorically stops. As we walk to the front row, Scott Romer is the photographer. He did 20 years ago. Remembered this event when the dorky family came to the amphitheater. And the first match, it's the guy who had the lightning bolt on the side of his leg. He was a journeyman. They start chanting blood, blood, and they're swearing, MF this, MF that. My mother looks at my father. She goes, Jack, turn around and tell them to stop swearing. We have children. My dad's like, I'm not turning around anywhere. So during intermission, my father says, let me go to the hospitality suite to see what's going on. He goes up there, and this is my dad's retelling of the story. The Andy Frame lets him up. Bob Luce is passed out on a vinyl couch. There is a pile of finished chicken bones on this Formica table with a fuzzy TV with like rabbit ear antennas. And Bob Luce looks up all druggy and he goes, Bob, I'm Jack Stewart. Bernie Terowitz is a friend. He gave me tickets. can we meet the wrestlers? He's like, oh, Jack, yeah, the party ended. They all went back to the locker room, and my dad closed the door and went back to his seat, and he was like, oh, I mean, we could not get out of there fast enough, except for me, I just thought it was the greatest thing in the world. And I had curly blonde hair. So everyone in the audience was like, that must be Spike Huber's kid. That must be Spike Huber's kid. And it's funny because Bobby Eaton, when I wrestled Bobby, the Midnight Express with Jim Cornette, and I wrestled them for WCW, the first night, Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane were like, Bobby Eaton kept going to Stan Lane. Hey, Bobby, Stan, we got Spike here. We got little Spike Jr. here. So, yeah, people said I'm the love child of Billy Joe Travis and Spike Huber. So that was my foray into wrestling. And then when Vern Gagne's show trumped Bruisers, it was before Bruisers. It was a little bit more professional. And then, of course, Hulk Hogan was on. And I tell everybody without even blinking an eye, Hulk Hogan, and seeing him live when I was in high school totally transformed my life. Hearing the crowd, that oiled up body, tan body, and the blonde hair, and all these other 60s, 70s era wrestlers like Bockwinkel, Vachon, and Bruiser, and and then you see this new era guy come out, and the crowd was, going crazy, and just so, and then as I got in like senior year of high school, I wanted to be Ric Flair, which I eventually did. Not to the point of Ric Flair, as Larry Zbyszko would always call me, the $5 Ric Flair. But so that's how I got into pro wrestling, and I just love that one-on-one competition. And folks, back in '86, wrestling was like the mafia. You couldn't just go to a wrestling school, and if there was a wrestling school, it wasn't advertised like usually like it is like for the past 30 years. So my dad heard that there was you could get into wrestling in Memphis. That's all I knew. So I just told my high school football coach, I don't want to go. I don't want to take a scholarship. I don't care if it's from UCLA. Of course I didn't get one from UCLA, but I want to go to Memphis State. He's like, what? I said, I want to go to Memphis State or Ole Miss, which was, 40 minutes from Memphis. So he called the coach and he's like, look, he doesn't have a high enough grade point average. He needs a 2.0. And so I became an invited walk-on, preferred walk-on at Memphis State. And 3 weeks into spring practice, a fraternity brother meets the legendary Buddy Wayne, Memphis legend, in a grocery store. He's like, look, we have this crazy guy at our frat. He's playing football at Memphis State. He came down there to be a pro wrestler. And Buddy Wayne must have been like taken back enough to say, well, Jesus, that kid sounds serious. Give him my number. And I got Buddy's number. We met. I started setting up the ring, which I'm always proud to say that I literally paid my dues. I set up the ring in the Memphis territory while I was in college and while I was training. And then I finally got my first match. I won. In my second match, I had the character of the Beach Boys, and we wrestled for Jarrett the whole summer. So that's how I got my start.
Yeah, you teamed with the Beach Boys. You teamed with Van Horn. That's the name.
Van Horn, my buddy.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know. Tell us about Van.
Van is Jerry. I obviously had an aptitude for wrestling because I did it on All My Friends for 10 years, which worked because I was a pretty good startup wrestler. Like I got it so easily just because I practiced it so much on my buddies in grade school and high school. And so Jerry Lawler, folks, I'm not lying to you. And Jim Cornette says, well, they never fucking repeated this mistake again. That they took this Yankee from Chicago in Memphis, gave me a win, my first match. My second match, Bill Dundee doesn't show up. They need a tag team partner for Jerry Lawler in the main event at a spot show against Dutch Mantell and Rip Rogers. I wrestle in the opening, and at my second night in the business, I am in a tag team main event with Jerry Lawler, Dutch, and Rip Rogers. In my third night in the business, Jerry Lawler says, look, I saw these jams in a magazine. I think a tag team called the Beach Boys coming out to, round, get around, I get around would be a great tag team. I think I got this kid from the Outlaw territory named Van Horn. He's from Memphis. He works for Plow, which owned Coppertone. and I think you guys would work well together. So he put us together, and we wore those jam colorful shorts down to our
Shorts, yeah.
knees,
Yeah.
and just had a summer. And it was funny. I thought we stopped getting booked because Jerry hated us, and we stopped getting booked in August because that's when Jerry Jarrett took back the book. I don't know if
Yeah,
people
right.
know they
Yeah,
shared it every
rotated.
6 months.
Yeah.
So we actually went a month into the Jerry Jarrett booking, and then and that was the 5-6 months where it was the last sellout. Dundee and Buddy Landell, sold out with Dutch and Lawler. I was there still training, and then it started to go downhill. So they didn't want 37 tag teams. So I'm assuming I never even got the straight answer. We stopped getting booked by Jerry, but man, Van and I were over. We brought women, young ladies to the arena. And we were humble. We'd let anyone beat the crap out of us, and I learned a tremendous lot from those 3 months being on the road in the summer with Jarrett and Lawler.
Yeah. So when you stopped getting booked,
I'm sorry. So that's how I met Van, and I'm still friends with them. And I think Van should have went way further in the wrestling industry. Something I want to talk about with myself and some guys with WWA. It was the start of the cosmetic portion of pro wrestling.
Right.
And Van, just like myself to some degree, didn't have that cosmetic, look, that steroid cosmetic look. I think that hurt him. But a worker, a talker, I mean, you can't find any better than Van. Never hurt anybody. He's just a great hand. Just a great guy, great travel partner. Love him to this day.
Yeah. So when you stopped getting booked in Memphis, is that when you went to Indianapolis?
Yeah. I mean, this is, Buddy Colt. And man, I want to talk about Buddy Colt a lot. Yeah. I mean, there's things I disagree with him and agree with him, but he's mentioned, the territories were great. Folks, I hope you can hear my sincerity come through this telephone line. The territory days sucked donkey's butt. I mean, if you were in Bill Watts, yes, you were in fairly nice arenas once in a while. You were making 700-mile trips from Tulsa to New Orleans. The Memphis territory, you're putting 600 miles a week in the car. When I worked for Lawler was great. My first paycheck, I know people won't believe this, my first paycheck in 86 with Lawler was $925. Now that's, it's about 3 times the money. So you're talking about a freshman in college making today's money around $2,700. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But in the territory days, you're putting on so much wear and tear on your car, on your body, and travel. Most of the time, it's crappy motels. You stay 6 months, you go to another place. God forbid if you were married with kids, the territory days sucked. Except for the top few people. Yes, being a young guy, it was fun. But I had ADD. I could not sit in the car for 7-8 hours. And when I even went to to Watts in February, Van and I went for like 4 days with Watts. I mean, it was, I could tell Dave, it was like, I can't do this. I guess I have to quit wrestling because I can't take these car rides.
Yeah. That's some long trips, isn't it?
Yeah. And I remember, when I started to get a little heat with like Fire and Flame and Joe LeDuc. Can you imagine this? Like Buddy Landell said, you pissed off a 300-pounder. We got problems. Because Buddy was like my older brother in Memphis. But Dutch Mantell sits down. He goes, "Kid, somebody's going to kill you around here. You're just too happy-go-lucky, and we're all trying to feed our family." So yes, I was kind of thrown out of the Memphis territory because I smiled and I was happy-go-lucky. But that's I'm just ribbing the guys. But that is the true story. So Dutch, I want to talk about the territories. Dutch is sitting on the bench. Buddy Landell is combing his hair with that big 1980s comb behind Dutch, standing up, and Dutch goes, "I'm going to send you to the Bill Watts territory." And he starts writing Bill Watts' number down. I look up, and Buddy Landell is going behind a Dutch Mantell with the "don't do it," shaking his head back and forth, knowing that I couldn't stand the car rides in the Memphis territory. I'm going to go to Louisiana, Yeah. So I never called Bill Watts. I tried to get in with Bill Dundee. And this is another thing that sucked about wrestling And again, I'm not an old guy complaining. I'm just saying, like, this is one of the unfortunate things about the unorganization of wrestling back in the early 80s. Now, I was a pretty good hand, even though I had 6 months in the business. I looked good. I was 19 years old. I should have went to Florida, Continental, Portland, as like a first card guy. But there was no booking office, Dave.
Yeah.
There was like no central person to say, oh, hi, oh, Jonnie Stewart. Yeah, they said you're a pretty good hand. You know what? We'll send you down to Florida for 6 months. And that really bothers me to this day that I didn't immediately just say, let me go to Continental, because I didn't even know what Continental was. I didn't know
Yeah.
Florida had wrestling. And I know people don't believe wrestlers when we say we're so wrapped up in our lives and on the road, we don't know what else is going on in the wrestling world. But it is true, folks. You don't know. I did not know there was a Florida territory, a Continental Wrestling. I didn't think I was good enough to go to Texas. I didn't know there was Portland, and I didn't know there was Kansas City, and so on and so forth. That I easily would have been a first match guy. So I literally, other than doing a week with Bill Watts in February, I literally sat at home. My mom and dad are like, well, this business is crazy. You're not even getting booked anywhere. And my mom's like, are you sure you're good? I'm like, Mom, I can work. Trust me. So my dad, Bernie, again, Ben's Auto Sales, comes back into the picture, and he's like, look, let me give your number. Give Bob Luce your son's phone number. Bob Luce called me a day later. He goes, look, I heard some good things about you, but it's your dad talking you up. And it sounds like I'm about to pat myself on the back, but it was a really nice moment with me and Bruiser. So please, folks, just forgive me for sounding like, Ric Flair. So Bob Luce says, I want you to go down. I've got you booked at TV in Indianapolis, but you're only going to do interviews. You'll meet all the guys down there. So my mom and dad give me their Cadillac to drive. I've got a London Fog, overcoat. I've got a suit on with the tie, dress shoes. And my point is, I'm not patting myself on the back. When I walked into the studio, I'll never forget this. Bruiser's at a table, and he's got the book out, and he's doing the books, and the Golden Lion is talking to him, and he looks up and he goes, "Yeah, are you at the TV station?" And I'm like, "No." I said, "I'm Jon Stewart. Bob Luce sent me." And Dick puts the pencil down. He looks at me, he goes, "Bob Luce sent you?" I said, "Is there something wrong?" He goes, "Fuck no, there's nothing wrong. Bob Luce sends me guys that look like they pulled him off the gutter in Madison Avenue." He goes, "God damn it. See, it's nice to finally meet a professional." I'm 19 years old. So it's like, take your jacket off. You start cutting promos. So me and Calypso Jim start cutting promos with that skinny, and forgive me, folks, I've got a bad brain. The skinny guy he looked like a country western singer. Bruiser's announcer in Indianapolis. He had the greased hair, skinny guy, about 5'6", great guy. So me and Calypso Jim start doing interviews. The Golden Lion is there, and the Golden Lion has a 3-piece suit on with a gold lion chain around his neck with this golden hair. I swear to God, folks, can I tell you something? I know he was on your show, Dave. The Golden Lion in 1987 was the bomb. That guy would have just showed up at a WWF event backstage. Somebody would have gave that son of a bitch a dark match. And, was he the greatest hand in the world? No, but the freaking gimmick with the tail and the gauntlet gloves and that blonde hair. And Tim was like 6'1.5", 300 pounds in 1987. You can't say a bad word to me about Golden Lion, but he was there too. And I'm like, okay, this is pretty, because, folks, the one thing that I was a little leery about is, Bruiser's TV show and promotion, it was like, it wasn't as polished and professional as probably it could have been. It was almost like, where you went to die or you went to start in the wrestling business. And, but it was so, let me flip that over, Dave. When I walked into this beautiful television studio, which I still don't know where it was, in Indianapolis. It was brand new inside, and Bruiser had a nice clothes on, the Golden Lions all in a 3-piece suit. And I'm like, well, maybe things took a turn for the better here. And Yeah, so I started wrestling for WWA in February of 1987.
Yeah. So who all were you wrestling at that time? Who all did you wrestle at that time in
So
WWA?
yeah, so I did a couple of TV tapings, and I almost got fired right away. So they send me to Toledo, and I go to Toledo with the Russian Brute. Can you imagine
Uh,
that 6-hour car ride?
whew.
You know, I was called Stoop about 37 times. Beach Boy, Beach Boy, there's so much I got to teach you. You Stoop, you. But
What was
I
he
love.
doing it? Was he doing it in a Russian accent?
No, no, no. And when I heard his
Okay.
interview with you in the Russian accent, I'm like, oh dear God, this is an abortion. But anyways, but I love George Petrowski. He
Yeah,
was the
yeah,
best.
yeah,
So
yeah.
we go to TV in Toledo, and I wish I could find this match. It was in a studio, and folks, I don't remember, but it had the Miller Lite logo. It was not in that ballroom. It was like in a studio setting,
Yeah.
and Scott Steiner was there.
Yep.
Um, the Polynesian Wild Man, me,
Yep.
Calypso, Russian Brood, couple of other guys. So Dr. Jerry, not Dr. Jerry Graham, whoever was like,
Junior. Yeah.
yeah, Junior, right? God
Yeah.
forbid. But whoever, and the Great Wojo was there.
Yep.
And I'm 19, but like I remember Larlo saying, "You've got to fucking stand up for yourself when you know an injustice is happening. You can't let people walk all over you." So here is this 19-year-old guy. I've got the spandex Beach Boy shorts, meaning like I look like a modern wrestler. I was tan. I had a pretty decent body, young guy. You're just getting inserted in WWA. And the producer's like, well, okay, we want the Wild Polynesian to go over on you in 8 minutes. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. And I'm like, and Wojo's standing there, and whoever was producing, it wasn't Jerry Graham. I said, I will do a job for anybody, but I'm not going to come in here and have it not make sense. You're bringing me in. This is the first time on TV for WWA or Toledo Wrestling, and you're going to job me out to somebody? Does that even make any sense? And even the Wild Polynesian was like, you could tell he was like, this guy, this guy he is making sense. I mean, and I remember the Wild Polynesian looking at the agent going, let's do a count out or something. And he wasn't ribbing me because we gave each other the matches and stuff like that. And so I was really proud that I stuck up for myself. So when the summer came, the first show of the summer season for Bruiser, Dr. Jerry Graham Jr. and Wojo and somebody else pulled me in a motel room before a spot show. And they're like, so what was the problem at TV? Why were you giving people a problem? And I remember telling Dr. Jerry Graham Jr. especially, I said, you're bringing me in. It's the first time I'm in. You got all of these guys that are 50, 60 years old. You got this young kid, me, regardless of whether you think I'm good or not, or I got a good body or I don't. Why would you job me the first day? And Jerry Graham's like, something to consider, and but they were impressed that I stuck to my gun. So that I told that story because just to let your listeners hear sometimes the insanity of pro wrestling and why these promoters went out of business. Vince McMahon put no one out of business. 90% of the promoters put themselves out of business. Just if you want my opinion. So that summer, the whole summer, I wrestled the Golden Lion. And I will tell a story, and I'm going to give all the credit to Tim or Dick the Bruiser Jr., the Golden Lion. Him and I have our first match at St. Rita High School outdoors. And this is my dad telling me the narrative. There was about 1,500 people, and I've got the Beach Boy gimmick with the music, and Tim, the Golden Lion comes out with the spandex, and my dad's like, you guys looked like you were worked for the WWF. He goes, John, everybody was like, oh my God, because you saw some of Bruiser's talent was, they had, I'm sorry. I told you, Dave, I would be honest and shit.
Yeah.
I'm going to. They came out in shitty old attire that was worn out. They looked worn out. Here comes the Golden Lion, 300 pounds, 6'2", Jonnie Stewart tan with the spandex outfit on and the music. And I remember my dad telling me, he goes, John, you guys look like you should have been in the WWF. And Tim and I just tore the house down. I mean, and I give the Golden Lion the credit because all I did was Ricky Steamboat sell to him the whole match. And that must have triggered something, because the entire summer, other than a few matches with the Wild Polynesian Man, I wrestled the Golden Lion, and it was great, you know. And it bonded Bruiser Jr. and I to this day. You know, he's one of my very best friends in wrestling. I used him for 10 years with Dale Gagne's new AWA Wrestling Superstars. I mean, I just love him, and I want to tell a story about him too. You know, if further down, which I think people can't believe, but yeah. So it was a great summer. It was just a great summer. Working for Bruiser. I've got a funny story. We were in Danville, Illinois, and Rosemont, Illinois gets flooded. I can't fly out. There's you literally could not drive your car past like O'Hare Airport on the expressway. The whole area was flooded. But the airport had like 5 flights out. One was Danville. So I actually took a plane, a Bruiser wrestler, took a plane to Danville, got a cab to the fairgrounds. And Bruiser went crazy when I said, well, you gotta help me pay for the plane ticket, blah, blah, blah. So he gives me like $35. Okay. And I'm like, Dick, come on, $35. He goes, oh, okay. He pulls out a roll of nickels and puts it in front of me and says, Dave, I'm not lying to you. He goes, here, that should help with trans. I said, transit, the plane ticket was $180, whatever. So he had somebody from the fairgrounds let me stay in a Winnebago that was on the fairgrounds that we used to change in. And then I got a taxi or something back to the airport the next day. But can I tell you the final part of that story? About 4 days later, I get the phone rings at my parents' house because I'm moving with my mom and dad. And, Johnny, it's Dick. I'm like, what's going on? He goes, I want to ask you a question, and I want the honest truth. I'm like, shoot. He goes, did you? Jesus, I ran for Illinois governor. I should never even tell this story. Is it true you made out with a girl and promised to take her to the prom or to homecoming? I'm like, well, I mean, I did kiss a young lady, but she was like 18. I'm not worried about her age. That was the fair promoter's daughter. And they're not mad. They want you to take her to homecoming. I'm like, Dick, I'm not taking her to homecoming. He's like, look, this will blow my fair show the next. He goes, I'll give you my Mercedes. I said, I know one thing. You are not giving me your Mercedes. I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm sorry. I didn't rape her. I didn't have sex with her. I just made out with her. Yeah, I'm Jonnie Stewart. I'm 19 years old. I promised the world. And, oh, for God. But it was fun. You know, the one thing I didn't like a couple of times, they gave me Shotgun Willie. And, folks, I'm not going to be gross here, but kind of follow the bouncing ball. He always brought his girlfriend with him, and they had this conversion band. And they would, you know, get busy an hour before the matches, and then he would wrestle me and stick his fingers in my mouth. And I'm not being disgusting, but that is freaking disgusting. We were in, I can't remember the town. It was in Illinois. We went back to the dressing room, and folks, the true story, I was never confrontational with anyone. I've never been in a fight in pro wrestling. I've really never been in an argument with anybody. I avoided conflict. I went back to that locker room, and I said, if you ever stick your effing fingers in my mouth after screwing around with your skanky whore girlfriend, I swear to God, I'll take that fire extinguisher and I'll smash it over your head. And you could see Moose Cholak had his hands folded, and he was like shaking his head back and forth with that like disgusted look. Like, did he actually do that to this? Because Moose loved me. Did he actually do that to the beach? He used to call me the beach. And that's like one of the only times I have ever had a confrontation in the locker room. But it was so freaking disgusting. And I never wrestled him after that, thank God. But yeah, so but it was great. It was a great experience to see Moose Cholak on TV for 10 years and to finally be with him and have a camaraderie with him. The same thing with Dick, and you know, hanging around with the Golden Lion and the Russian Brute. It was great, and a young Scott Steiner who was who was just starting up. And people are like, Scott Steiner started with Dick the Bruiser. Yeah, he did.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about WWA, I grew up watching it. Right, they had a lot of great talent, but they weren't pushing the right guys in my eyes. And that's the knock on Bruiser and the WWA is when they had some talent, they had some young guys, but yet they were still no disrespect meant, but they were still pushing the Moose Cholocks, the Fred Currys, the Bobo Brazils, the Dick the Bruisers. When these guys were in their 50s and 60s, and they were putting them over. And do you think that was kind of the nail in the coffin for the WWA?
Without a doubt. I mean, Jerry Jarrett tells the story that Dick the Bruiser.
Yep.
You can tell I'm still a fan. I call him by his full name. But Bruiser went to Jarrett and said, "Look, I need help.
Yep.
My territory's dying on a vine." And Jarrett took over the book, and Bruiser called him, a month later and said, "I'm not on any, main events." And Jarrett said, "Well, this is why your territory's dying.
Yep.
You're putting yourself on every main event. Nobody wants to see you anymore." And they got into a fight, and that was it. And Jerry Jarrett was 100% correct. And, and Bruiser did so many things wrong, and he did so many things right. I mean, folks, you need to go find this. There was this was never, I don't believe, ever shown in Chicago, but I think probably Toledo and Indy. There was first of all, Bruiser's intro was not bad. But it was Dick the Bruiser and somebody else in like two chairs with a beautiful blow up of the amphitheater behind them, like you see on like CBS Sports. And they were like introducing the show. And I just saw this about 6 months ago. I'm like, damn, that's like Vince McMahon type mentality, And Bobo Brazil, how many times can you see him? Moose Cholak, and then at this time, Moose is wearing a T-shirt and baggy jeans. He doesn't have the Joe LeDuc watchman's cap on with the plaid jacket and you know what I mean? It's like everybody gave up, so to speak. And he pushed guys, and there were guys. I'm sorry, but I'm being honest. I'm being honest as a fan. The great Wojo, he didn't have any charisma. He was going to sell you five tickets. Great amateur wrestler and a nice guy. But that's it. He never drew money. And you had Spike Huber, who was terrible on his interviews, but a great body. I guess he had enough charisma. And what I would have done is Paul Christie and Dr. Jerry Grant. Those were heat-seeking missiles. I still to this day, Dave, my right hand to God. I'll be in the car. And Paul Christie still pisses me off from being a kid where he would never let anyone touch him. That he'd have a 10-minute match, and he locked up one time and did the arms in front of him. And now, wait a minute. I've been a pro wrestler on and off for 30 years, okay? I'm 56 years old, and a guy from the 70s is still pissing me off like, oh, I wish somebody could have. That is heat. That is magic. And so, and not and here's something – to go to your point, Dave, something I disagree with Bobby Colt. The territories were great, and we don't have them, so you can't learn. Well, if the territories was this great breeding ground, why didn't Dick the Bruiser have 3 or 4 fresh young guys coming in every other month? I mean, it's ludicrous. This big talent pool is a myth. I am telling your listeners the mythology. The territories did not produce this massive talent pool. Yes, they produced great wrestlers and taught everyone how to work. But if you think there was this huge bevy of young guys, these Steve Regals in 1979 ready to go, there wasn't. Vern Gagne would have a camp every other 4 years. So very few people were trained. So for the territories, and I hope people appreciate, I'm being honest here, for the territories to produce this large amount, I'm not saying it didn't, the large amount of young talent to be inserted into these smaller promotions. Folks, it's a myth. It didn't happen. And you could see it displayed in Bruiser's wrestling promotion. He had no young talent coming in that could help rejuvenate the promotion. Steve Regal, was about it. And then letting guys on the show in positions in the card that weren't ready and weren't good workers. You can see that as a fan. When somebody is not a good worker. And then you put Steve Regal in there in 1979 or 80, and he's flying around like Tully Blanchard. You go, oh shit, these other guys are terrible. Again, I'm speaking as a 13-year-old kid in the 70s, what I
Yeah.
witnessed. And I think my perception was right on the money. So again, and then, Vern Gagne's studio show, in my opinion, sucked. And then, but Bruiser had this, the Armory show every Sunday. So it did give it a little, je ne sais quoi, like, hey, this is a bigger promotion. But then again, the main event, Bruiser, Crusher, Moose, Bobo, Bruiser, Bobo, come on. Then Bruiser Brody came, and that picked up I remember when we were watching it, but you just couldn't carry some of the interviews were okay. Most of them sucked. It was just, I just think if somebody would have taken time to massage Bruiser's promotion, that it could have lasted a hell of a lot longer.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. Not long after that, I think you went on to help Sam DeCero form Windy City Pro Wrestling. Did you meet Sam in the WWA when he was doing the Max thing, the World Warriors?
No, we were I was doing a show in Wheaton. I wrestled the mighty Igor. And Sam came up to me and I'm going to give Sam a compliment here. Again, I'm around all these old guys that are just worn and tattered. Folks, I'm just shooting. I'm not being mean. I'm a nice guy. I'm sure people say that about me. Yeah, Jonnie Stewart's worn and tattered. But all these guys that are worn and tattered, all of a sudden Sam DeCero there was like a building that we changed in, and Sam was outside the building. He had these cowboy boots on, these jeans, this nice shirt, and a gold watch, and, the Danny Terrio hair. And he's like, hey, I'm Sam DeCero. And I looked at him, I said, you're not the guy that was Sammy Darrow for Vern. He's like, yeah. And he starts laughing. I said, bro, when I was in high school and you came out with your brand new wrestling boots, your red pads, your red tights, Sam had a great body. He had the Magnum TA mustache. I said, you look like a wrestler. I was saying this to Sam. So I was immediately enamored with him because he was about 6 years older than me. And he's like, look, all I've heard all summer, go see the Beach Boy, go see the Beach Boy. I love what I see. Will you come work with me? I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm starting up Windy City Wrestling. So it got back to Bruiser like a week later. And he's like, you'll wrestle one time. Mark my words. I said, Dick, I'm an independent contractor. You're paying me $40 a night. Why can't I go work for other people? He goes, because he's working in my territory, Chicago. I'm like, he's not renting the Pavilion or the Allstate, the Rosemont Horizon. He goes, you'll work one time. So Sam had a show in Wayzata, Illinois, and I worked one time. But about 4 months later, 3 or 4 months later, Sam said, look, I broke off. I forget who he was co-promoting with. He said, I broke off. I'm going to start my own thing. He got TV. And I think it was a great move because it allowed me to stay in Chicago and not have to travel a lot. I got to stay in college. Sam, we worked at the amphitheater like 3 or 4 times. I teamed up with Sonny Rogers as the Beach Boy. We had spot shows all over Illinois, a couple in Iowa. It was a great group. I really, and I worked I practiced every week, once a week. I got in the ring and sparred, and it really helped hone my skills. I wanted to be Ric Flair, so I turned against Sonny after 2 years and did the Ric Flair gimmick. And Jim Barnett was at a show from WCW and hired me when they hired Tom Zink, Pillman, and Johnny Ace. And so, my career was going forward. Promoters were going to the matches, and I was getting the tap on the shoulder. So, thank God for WCW, because if I would have stayed with Bruiser, I mean, where would that have went? It would have been 1988. I would have been, wore out, pissed off. And instead I was on local TV in Chicago doing television shows and radio interviews. I was like the spokesman for WCW because I spoke well. It was only logical. So I would be the guy to go to radio stations, news stations, newspaper interviews. And I really got some attention. My parents were happy because they saw that my career was progressing and so on and so forth. And then, I got the the tap from WCW because of Sam DeCiro and WCW. And that's, that was, but my time with Sam was great. It pissed off Bruiser. That was the last time I ever talked to him before he died. So I kind of regretted that. But I try to plead my case like I'm an independent contractor. Why can't I, wrestle for other guys? Even DeCiro, had the Bruiser mentality. I got tapped to go to Singapore, Indonesia, and Malaysia in '88, and that pissed off Sam. I'm like, you're not even paying me. What do you care? What is it? Any of your business? And that started our feud, which is no longer. Like, I'm like, what is it? Any of your business that I'm going to make, $1,000 a week, for Pyramid Home Videos in the Far East, and we don't even have shows. Just, but it was that cigar box mafia mentality that I hated. I still hate to this day. Which it's not a lot of it in wrestling, thank God. But yeah, I had a great time with Bruiser and Windy City, in Indiana and Illinois.
Yeah, and you mentioned Barnett going to World Championship Wrestling.
Yeah.
Tell me that story. I've always heard you got a contract and something messed that up.
Here.
So what is it with that story?
It's 10 Ways to Destroy Your Wrestling Career by Jonnie Stewart. It'll be on YouTube one day. So now, folks, I think that you can hear that I've been brutally honest up until this point, and I will continue to do so because there isn't anybody that effed up a deal more in 20 years than I did. So Jim Barnett calls me and says, Johnny, I saw you in Chicago and I really liked you and I think we can do something with you. I said, Jim, Mr. Barnett, I have the Ric Flair character. I don't care. There can always be two people. Look at Buddy Landell, and Buddy Rogers was copied by Ric Flair. And I'm like, okay. So Paulie Dangerously calls me like 3 days later. He's like, hey, there's buzz that they're bringing you in. I'm like, yes, this is great. And so Paulie was one of my inside guys. Now Eddie Gilbert is one of the bookers on the committee. Folks learned for about 3 months back in '89. They had a booking committee. I wrestled with Eddie in Windy City. Again, something I compliment Sam DeCiro for. Bringing Eddie Gilbert in, Paulie Dangerously in. We wrestled the Buddy Rose and Doug Summers, Sonny Rogers and I like 6 times. How much do you think we learned from those two guys? They're like, you got your PhD in tag team wrestling. So Eddie Gilbert is one of the bookers, and he loved me, and I idolized Eddie because he dressed nice, and the snakeskin cowboy boots, the faded acid wash jeans. He had the Halliburton, the Louis Vuitton little purse, the Rolex. I idolized Eddie Gilbert, and he knew that. So he's one of the bookers. I'm like, this is great. So Barnett calls me, and I'm just going to tell you and your listeners what happened. He's like, well, they're giving out 3-year contracts, but we would like to give you a 4-year contract because you're so young, and we think there's a long-term potential. I'm like, that's great. And he's like, and he shouldn't have, but he's like, Tom Zink, because he's got experience, is going to get $200,000. We've got this kid from the Cincinnati Bengals, Brian Pillman. We're going to match you what he's getting at $150 a year. I'm like, done. I'm like, okay, great. Now, Johnny, I want you to go to the UIC Pavilion. We have a show there in 10 days. You'll meet all the boys. Make sure you have contact with Eddie Gilbert. Now, folks, follow the bouncing ball here. Make sure you touch base with Eddie Gilbert, meet all the boys. I'm sure you know a couple of them already, and I'll be in contact. I show up at the UIC Pavilion with a couple of people from Windy City. Dave, are you listening to me? I have a cream, CREAM, cream-colored suit on, like I'm a plantation owner in 1860, brown Porsche Carrera glasses, geeked bleach blonde hair, and a suit and a tie on. And I kayfabe Ric Flair when he comes out into the hallway.
Oh.
Now, Rick will tell everybody this was his most insecure. He was seeing a psychiatrist at the time. True story.
Yep.
Now, what a effing asshole I was. And I was so respectful of elder, veterans in the wrestling business. I really was. I always kept my mouth shut. This was so out of character, but I was so intimidated by Rick. And he was just standing there with his hands on his hips. I'll never forget. He had gray slacks, a white shirt, blue, red, and white tie. And he looked at Mike. I forget Mike's last name. He was a photographer in Milwaukee. I love the guy. And he just kind of shook his head like, what a fucking goof. And according to Jim Cornette, Eddie Gilbert, and Paulie Dangerously, I also claim I'm the only guy Paul Dangerously has never lied to. They all told me the same story. When my name came up in the booking committee, Flair said, if you got to hire a ripoff Ric Flair, you don't fucking need me, and I'm done. And they all went, whoa, sit down. You know, it's Jon Stewart, forget it. And Eddie Gilbert was like, what do you mean forget it? This kid's a great worker. We have no young heel. Think about 1989 in WCW. They had no young heel. Tim Horner, Brad Armstrong, Wright Pillman's. They had no Dustin Rhodes. They had no young heel. I think the only heel that was kind of young was Kevin Nash, who was doing the bizarre. I think he was doing Vinny Vegas at the time.
Yeah,
so,
Vinny Vegas.
But he wasn't a heel. He was a monster heel. So they had no like Paul Christie, 23-year-old Paul Christie, so to speak. So Eddie Gilbert, according to Paul Heyman, really went to bed and said, so he doesn't have the Ric Flair gimmick. The kid's 21 years old. We have no young heels. And Flair said, you bring him in, I'm done. Now, folks, I am not saying Ric Flair thought I was Ric Flair material. I wasn't. Okay? I'm just saying that he was 40. He was going through a midlife crisis. He was seeing a shrink. And I was a total asshole the way I handled it. And Barnett called me and said, we got to pull your deal. You know, Rick does not want you to work with us. I said, well, I just dropped out of college. That's $10,000 a year. Who's paying that? And then it was, the hot potato. And God forbid you should cause problems and sue somebody in 1986. My parents wanted to sue Ted Turner, and rightfully so, for telling me to drop out and then taking my contract back. But I didn't want it to hurt my future. So we just ate the tuition, which is still wrong to this day. And a week after that happened, I get a call from Vern Gagne office, and they're like, we heard what happened. We'd love to bring you in. And I started with Vern in the spring of 1989. Thank God. I mean, it wasn't $150,000 a year, but at least it was ESPN. It was TV. Yep. I was keeping myself relevant. And I've told everybody that would listen to me, my 3 years with Vern and Greg were the greatest 3 years of my life in wrestling. Opposed to what a lot of people say about working for them, I had a blast. It was just a great time. Harmonious locker room. Eric Bischoff talks about it, and he's totally accurate. How everyone got along. There was never, this is like late 88 to 91. Everyone got along. There was never a fight except with Mike Enos and Vern Gagne, which I'd love to talk about that for a second later on. But everyone got along. Great moods. I got great talent, great matches, good arenas. It was a great time.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, I'm a fan of this era. I think it gets unnecessarily knocked, and I don't know why. But here you are, right in the mid to late 80s. You're on ESPN. I mean, you're wrestling guys like Sergeant Slaughter, Paul Diamond, the Coquina Maximus, the future Yoko. All these guys, and that's just a few of them. You were one of their top heels. Yeah. I mean, this exposure is just unreal, right? I mean, there wasn't very many guys that had, were on ESPN. I mean, this is a national cable network.
Yeah, you're right.
What was that like, getting that exposure? It was, here you are bouncing. Here you are, bam, on ESPN.
Yeah, it was great because they let me be Ric Flair, my dream, and no one bothered me. Dave, I mean, no one bothered me. Your name was on a list, at spot shows or TV. I knew all the Milwaukee guys who were enhancement talent. They brought in the Hangmen that were with Windy City, my buddies. I dressed with Zbyszko and Adnan in a little triangle corner at the heel exit to the arena. I'm on TV every Monday. People are calling my parents. I can't believe this. I'm sitting in Florida and your son is on ESPN. It's like, so it was nice. And WCW would bring me back. I filled in for Shane Douglas for 10 days. I filled in for anywhere in the area of Chicago, or I was hired to work for WCW anywhere in the Chicago area, like the Pavilion. And it was nice because like Tim Horner and Dustin and he died. Brad Armstrong. They would watch me on TV because the boys were still in the hotel rooms at 3:00 on a Monday before a spot show or something. So I remember Tim Horner like, "Oh, dude, your matches are great." And Brad Armstrong said, "Yeah, but your promos, stop screaming, brother. It's you know." But Brad Armstrong was like, "John, it's like shit." I almost like if they would pay me that money, I would want to be that place rather than, the WCW TV, which had no viewership. And when I would, I had such balls, and I'm not bragging. I'm just saying like that when I wrestled like Brad Armstrong or Tim Horner in the first or second match, I would treat it like it was the match after the intermission. I'm yelling at the crowd. People in Chicago remember me from Windy City. You know what I mean? There were people that knew me. So they would egg me on to make it seem like I was an over heel. And I remember I came back to the dressing room. And again, I'm just talking about, I'm not bragging. I'm telling people in any application in life, hey, grab the brass ring. Go for it. Who cares if you get in trouble? And I remember going back in the locker room and Tim Horner had his head down. I'm like, what did I do? He goes, what did you do? He goes, that was the best goddamn match I've had in 2 years. He's like, because I put him over like $1 million, and I got him over. I kept saying, "Is this your hero? Is this your hero?" And the fucking Pavilion was going crazy, like it was the match after the intermission. And I bring that up because Vern and Greg gave me this like foundation of like, hey, you're on ESPN, and another funny thing is when you look back, just like you said, who were the heels? They phased out kind of coming to TV every 3 weeks. Colonel De Beers. They only brought in the Russian Brute a couple of times. There was 3 heel tag teams. Who was the heel single wrestler? Think about it. It was Jon Stewart. And I remember Larry and Adnan going to me, behind Larry, there's nobody else heel except this man, Jonnie Stewart. He's telling Zbyszko. And Larry's there smoking his cigarette. He goes, "Ah, yes, Jonnie Stewart, the $5 Ric Flair." And can I tell a funny story? I had that blue and yellow robe,
right,
that had glued on plastic balls, little plastic balls, made by a lady who owned the Air Host bar that all the wrestlers went to in Chicago. They would fall off 50 at a time. And Dave, I am shooting here. Here is it's TV, the Rochester Mayo Civic Center. It's me, Zbyszko, and Adnan tucked away in this little locker room right by the door to the arena. And all you heard for 3 hours during TV was, "Son of a bitch, mother, God, illustrious, this effing robe." Because all the boys would be stepping on their way to the shower on these glass balls. So I am hiding. And one time, Wayne Bloom got really pissed off. And, Wayne could have kicked the shit out of anybody at that time. And that's something not a lot of people know about Wayne Bloom. And he starts cutting a promo on me in the locker room. And Greg's going, "Will you calm the hell down?" He goes, "Oh, this is ridiculous. This goddamn cheap robe. Look at this." And I guess he had indentations in his foot. Adnan's eyes were open like the size of tea saucers. And Larry's smoking his cigarette, and he goes, "Oh, Jonnie Stewart." He goes, isn't it nice that your robe gets more heat than you?" It was great. Can I tell one last funny story about the TV tape? Okay. Well, I don't know how much time we have or whatever, but
no, whatever you need.
So WCW brings in me on their road. They bring in the Destruction Crew.
Yeah.
Vern and Greg start kind of sniffing the wind like I think they're going to get snatched by Turner. and really, especially Wayne and Mike.
Yeah.
So, they find out, am scheduled to go back to play college football for North Park University. So
Yeah.
now Vern and Greg and Bob Ryan, who talks like this, remember Bob Ryan with the big glasses?
Yeah. Yeah.
They're hatching a plan to not let Johnny Stewart get the belt and to take the belt from the Destruction Crew. Folks, my right hand to God. So Wayne Bloom gets wind that they're gonna put DJ Peterson and Paul and the Trooper over the Destruction Crew at TV. So Wayne Bloom no shows. Folks, this story has never been told anywhere because nobody interviews me. but I have never told this story ever. Okay? I just want to
All
let
right.
everyone. So now Vern, Greg, and Nick Bockwinkel are like, Stewart, Enos. So we go into the shower area. It's me. Mike Enos is to my right, facing Vern, Greg, and Nick Bockwinkel. And Vern goes, "We heard you're going to WCW, where you're not going to go there with the belts." And Mike Enos was a mother after Vern, kind of like, like almost, well, not almost, very disrespectful. He goes, "If we were going, we would tell you. We're not a bunch of jabronis, and we're not going, and we know you want to take the effing belts from us." And Vern goes, "This is my goddamn promotion." Now everyone is silent in the locker room. "This is my goddamn promotion, and I'll do what I want. And you're not going over tonight." And Mike goes, "Not without my partner. The fuck I am." So Vern snatches the belt from Mike Enos, as Kokima, Slaughter, everyone's listening. He snatches the belt from Mike Enos. Mike has got the other end. Vern goes into like a crouch, and they're like the Wallenda brothers in the circus, like doing a vaudeville act. Nick Bockwinkel's eyes were like, "I don't believe what I'm witnessing." And Greg is yelling, "Give him the belt, Mike! God damn it, give him the belt, Mike! Mike, give him the goddamn belt!" And Mike snatches it from Vern. And Vern goes, "This is ridiculous. I've never been so insulted in my life." Mike goes, "I'll put somebody over when my partner is here, not Johnny Stewart." And Vern goes, "Well, you got to go have a match." And I go, "Yeah, it's Johnny Stewart. I'm the jobber to the stars." And Greg goes, "Oh, what the fuck is it your problem? You're going to play college football anyway." And I go to Greg, because I'm now full of piss and vinegar, because my buddy Mike Enos just had a match with Vern Gagne. And I said, "What the F does it matter to you? The booking you give me once every 3 weeks, that's really going to matter if I'm going to play college football for 3 months?" And Vern looks at me and goes, "It's the, you talk with a little list. It's the fact you disrespected us," which he is right. I mean, to some degree. He goes, "It's the fact you disrespected us. That's the problem. We could have worked around anything." And I said, "Oh, so you're firing me?" "No, we're not firing you, but it's disrespectful. You're just going to go back and play college football at any point you want." So Mike goes, "Well, what the F is going to go on tonight?" And so they gave us Mike. Hey, folks, go watch it. It's on YouTube. It's Enos and Stewart versus Bram and Berg. Mike Bram with a B and Berg. And Mike Enos and I tear these Berg and Bram from Kansas City. Great guys. We tear these mofos up in 2 minutes. You can see me walk out. My robe isn't even tied. I'm scratching the side of my head, kind of giving an indication to any promoter, I'm free. I'm ready to leave. I'm done. And but before we went out and wrestled, Mike Enos is in a different locker area. I go back to Larry. I go back and sit down with Larry Zbyszko and Adnan. And Larry, again, he's like the peanut gallery. He goes, "Let's see, Johnny Stewart and Mike Enos against Vern, Greg, and Nick Bockwinkel." Larry looks at me and goes, "Johnny Stewart, that's the best booking you've ever had." But it was in the shower. I mean, that freaking Larry Zbyszko, folks, is probably one of the funniest guys on the planet Earth.
Yeah.
And but when he said, he goes, "Oh, that was your best booking ever." And to be honest with you, he was kind of right. But going back to like just the overall thing with Vern in the AWA, I remember, again, I'm not putting myself over. I am complimenting Vern and Greg. I take a managerial psychology exam in the professor's office at like 8 a.m. I get driven to O'Hare. I fly into Rochester, Minnesota. I stay at the Radisson. I go to Walgreens to get athletic tape. The shuttle bus passes the Mayo Civic Arena. There's me and Slaughter and Zbyszko and Nikita in the double main event on like the Jumbotron or a banner or whatever it was. I'm like, oh, I was marking out. The ESPN truck is in back of the arena. I go to Walgreens and I'm putting Slaughter over. I go to Walgreens, and the day I'm wrestling Sergeant Slaughter for the ESPN main event, you could buy like a kid's birthday party packet of his likeness. He's doing the Diet Coke commercial. And again, I'm not putting myself over. I'm like, I remember marking out so much that day, like how fortunate I was, no matter whatever happens in my wrestling career, to have like a night like this where you're still in college, you're wrestling one of the top 10 stars ever in wrestling, in my opinion, certainly in the past 30 years, without a doubt. A guy that would be on the main event for WrestleMania 7 months later, literally. He's on, his picture's on party favors at Walgreens. He's on Diet Coke commercials every, 30 minutes. And I owe all that to Greg and Vern. They never yelled at me. They never hollered at me. My checks cleared. They always gave me money when I was on the road and I needed it. Like if I was staying in Minneapolis, I just tell everybody it was just the greatest 2.5 years of my life as a wrestler.
Yeah. And during this time, you were kind of a darling of the wrestling magazines. It seemed like that you were just always in there, right? Always mentioned, always a picture.
Totally.
There was always this talk of Jonnie Stewart, right? The future of wrestling, so, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think of that? And of course, I know Vern wasn't always the most accepting of evolution in the future and passing on. And I get that to a degree, right? You gotta go with who you can trust. But what was it like? All this, you were getting a lot of exposure in the magazines, and here you're on ESPN. What was it like?
I hope I come across that anybody hears this complete interview, that I give credit to other people, because that is my personality and that's what I truly believe. And I say this to back up to make a foundation for my answer to your question, is that number one, it was so nice that everyone on the announcing team was on the same page and put me over like $1 million. Meaning, even if you didn't like me as an announcer, meaning you knew I was a heel, but this Jonnie Stewart, he's climbing the ladder for the light heavyweight championship. Lee Marshall putting over Pacific Palisades, that I rubbed shoulders with everyone in Hollywood. I had fans tell me, so what's it like to be at Hollywood parties and this and that? And that was Lee Marshall, Greg Gagne putting over that my father, I had a trust fund and Jonnie Stewart pulled up in his Porsche. And I try and use that as an example that I hope other people that are in wrestling get what I'm talking about, is when the whole announcing team is on the same page. And sometimes, folks, that doesn't always happen. And you've had a million announcers say, this announcer didn't put over this wrestler and he didn't, and it showed, whether they liked me or not. Ralph Strangis, Greg Gagne, Lee Marshall, even Eric Bischoff, who personally did not like me back then, put me over. Rich Kid, Hollywood Hills, and then we started a thing where Rob Lowe stole my girlfriend, okay? And he, in my Porsche's in his driveway, and Lee Marshall's like, this is crazy, folks, and all we're hearing is that Rob Lowe has stolen Jonnie Stewart's girlfriend, and Jonnie Stewart's Porsche's in Rob Lowe's driveway. Here's my point. The AWA is on the downswing. The WWF is Hollywood. But they were trying to, at least anyone watching the ESPN show, to say, Jesus, one of their wrestlers is like a Hollywood guy. What do you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, Rob Lowe stole his girlfriend, and he talks about driving up and down the coast of California, and he's from California, and, leaving Lee Marshall giving little digs. Jonnie Stewart from Pacific Palisades, that's just up the coast from Beverly Hills, Nick Bockwinkel, where you are. And that brings up Nick Bockwinkel, who every time somebody put a mic in front of his face said, Jon Stewart's the future of wrestling. And the biggest rub, I think, what happened with the magazines, Dave, is Bill Apter did an interview with Nick at that time, and he said, well, who do you think is the future of wrestling? And Nick tells Bill Apter on TV, I really think Jonnie Stewart has got a long future in this business. And Bill Apter just, that was it. Then it was just off to the races. And another thing that Bill Apter told me in 90 was that I don't know how many people worked at Pro Wrestling Illustrated, but and Bill Apter is telling me this story at a spot show. He's like, in 1 week, and again, I'm not putting myself over. I'm just telling you why the magazines gravitated. Bill Apter goes, Johnny, in 1 week, we would get a phone call. Here's the results from the Mid-South Coliseum on Monday. Here's the results from the Louisville Gardens on Tuesday. Here's the results from Syracuse, WCW on Wednesday. Jonnie Stewart put over. And then on Thursday in Scranton, Pennsylvania for WCW. And Friday for Buddy Roberts, blah, blah, blah promotion in Chicago, Jonnie Stewart. And Saturday, Jonnie Stewart got a win over DJ Peterson. And Bill Apter looked at the people in his office and said, wait a minute, what has Jonnie Stewart got a Learjet? How could he do 5 different towns with 4 different promotions in 1 week? And he put a little blurb in the magazine, busiest wrestler of the month, or like, this is why it's so hard to do, lists and stuff. So I must have impressed Bill Apter enough to keep my name, current and relevant in the magazine. So that was, but I was just trying to take any booking as I could, because Vern wasn't full time at that point. So, but yeah, like in May of 90, I wrestled every day. Didn't have a day off, and that caught Bill Apter's eye, and he did a blurb about it.
Yeah, the AWA kind of folded. You kind of stuck around till 2012, but I want to ask you, and I know you've probably talked about this at length, but some of my listeners may not know. In 2006, the story that despite your wrestling career, you might be most known for, you were hired to appear for a charity in Utah, a school. And what they had actually wanted was to book Jon Stewart, the comedian, correct? And
that is correct.
How did this happen? And what happened there?
I had a website at the time, JohnAllenStewart.com, a former pro wrestler, businessman. And I get an email from a teacher in Utah. She's like, we'd like to hire you to host our gala event. Now, I had run for United States Congress. I got a ton of national publicity because of Jesse Ventura, and Bob Backlund was running for Congress in Connecticut. So we had not a lot of people know this. I mean, there aren't popes that have articles about them in the New York Times. Bob Backlund and I had an article about our campaigns in the Sunday edition of the New York Times Magazine. I mean, that is huge. And we were on Hannity and Combs, O'Reilly Factor, the Los Angeles Times. I mean, Bob and I were everywhere. So, I had some cachet, so to speak, nationally. So I'm like, okay, they must want me to. It's a charter school, which means, they teach a different way. It's not traditional. I'm thinking they must want me to talk about politics and entertainment industry. I don't know. And I kept asking the teacher, are you sure you have the right Jon Stewart? She's like, yes, I'm on your website. Okay. I mean, I've got my AWA Superstars belt picture. I'm like, okay. So, folks, no joke. About 5:15 in the morning, my phone rings. My wife's like, oh, somebody died. I'm like, no, it's a radio station. And I knew this from running for Congress. You get a call at 5 in the morning. It's a radio station. Want to put you on. And it's a buddy of mine in New York. He's like, dude, are you watching TV? I'm like, it's 5 in the morning. He's like, John, you are on every station in the country. I'm like, for what? He goes, were you going to do a charity ball in Utah? I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, a reporter from the Sacramento Times got the story and dug and realized that they did not intend to hire you. He wrote a story. He goes, you're on. I'm like, yeah, right. I'm on every channel. Dave, I turn on Fox and Friends. They do a story about me, and like 20 seconds later, MSNBC, CNN, Channel 7 in Chicago. I wait like a minute. And how about this crazy story? Chicago pro wrestler. I was the splash page on AOL for the day. I was the lead story for 2 days because it was a notoriously slow, news cycle. And I would hang up the phone in my house. It would ring again. I would hang up. It would ring again. Must have done like 40 interviews. And so despite having an on and off 30-year wrestling career, I think my biggest highlight is being mistaken for Jon Stewart. And, the school called, we apologize. And, and I'm like, and then Jon Stewart was hosting the Emmys or the Oscars.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, oh, he's going to call you. They're going to do a little skit with you because the whole nation knows about it. And, he didn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
Because he probably thought he would get sued or I was getting sued. Or I was trying to, con somebody or something. But, it had nothing to do with me. I kept asking, do you have the right guy? Do you have the right guy? But I felt what it was like to be a celebrity for 2 days. I mean, it was, which sucks when you're not making millions. And you're doing all the interviews, being a celebrity sucks.
Yeah. I mean, that's the most non-wrestling story I've ever heard. It's
Somebody from AOL called me to get a better picture. And they're like, you and Hulk Hogan, and he mentioned somebody else, I think Macho Man, you're the only wrestlers that have ever been on AOL splash page. And he's like, I've never even heard of you. I'm like, yeah, I understand. So I have that feather in my bizarre career.
Yeah, maybe Bill Apter is right. I mean, you were the future. Nick Bockwell was right. You were the future.
Right, exactly.
There you go.
Exactly.
You Hogan and Savage. I mean, he wasn't on.
Great company.
That's right. All right. Well, let's wind this down. John, thanks for coming on. Like I said,
sure.
My listeners, when I put out there that we were having you on, it kind of went nuts. I mean, a lot of people were like, "Oh yeah, I remember Jon Stewart," and like you said, you don't do a lot of podcasts, so this is a treat and it's an honor that you came on and talked. I know you've done a lot. Like you said, you've had a political career and aspirations after wrestling. Is there a way that fans can keep up with what you're doing to follow you online, or do you kind of keep a low profile?
Yeah, I'm not on any social media. I always give out my email. If somebody wants to drop me a line, I that's fine. It's my full name, John, Jon, Allen, Alan. My last name, Stewart, Stewart, like the comedian Jon Stewart, at AOL.com. And, if you got any funny stories or, I'm always looking to connect with other wrestlers and stuff that from the 70s and 80s that I don't have their phone numbers. If there's any of the boys out there that want to connect with me, I would love to hear from them and swap stories and reminisce. It's always nice to hear from people that you worked with and gave your body to and created theater with.
Yeah, and I maybe you can come back on again later because I feel like we've only touched the tip of the iceberg on the stories you could tell. I mean, you've been a great guest, lots of great stories. So I appreciate it, John. Thanks for coming on.
Ladies and gentlemen, Wrestling Fans International Association is back. That's right, the premier fan club association of the 1970s and 1980s has been revived and is back in business. Join today. It's free at thewfia.org. That's thewfia.org. You can also join us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/WFIA 1969. All right, we are back here on Wrestling Nostalgia. Special thanks to Jon Stewart for coming on and being a guest. That was such a great interview, so much fun. And again, Johnny will be back on in the future because there's a lot more to talk about there, a lot more stories to tell, and I can't wait to talk to him again. What a great guest. Make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. Give us a rating and review wherever that is. And make sure you share when we put posts out there, the new episodes, whatever. That's the best way for us to grow is the word of mouth. Make sure you follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Just look up Wrestle Nostalgia. You can also follow me personally on Twitter at The Dave Dynasty. And probably the best way to support the show is to buy a shirt. You can go to PROWRESTLINGTEES.com/The Dave Dynasty. And we have a multitude of shirts there. Buy one and support the show. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your support through the 7 years of this podcast and your continued support and the endless amount of years moving forward. So we will be back in 2 weeks with another great episode for you here on Wrestling Nostalgia. Thank you once again for listening and all you do to support us. And until then, wherever you go and whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.